Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is iRunShib, or Shib for short. The goal of this video today is to dive into skills in Lost Ark, how they work, how tripods work, and then how attributes work in the game, an understanding of what they mean so you can help kind of fine-tune your end game build, or at least have an understanding of what the attributes are on your equipment and accessories. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about skills. Skills in Lost Ark are awesome simply because they're so graphically intensive, they look and feel amazing, and you get so many of them throughout your story progression in the game. You start off with about 5 abilities, at least I think I did on my gunner, and then from every 2 levels on until level 40, you get an ability. It's like 2 or 4 levels, there's probably a couple of different gaps, but for the most part, every 2 levels, you get an ability. So you keep climbing those abilities, you test out the abilities you like, you can find builds online, and just kind of get a feel for how you want your character to play out. Once you set up your 8 abilities down below here, you then get the opportunity to level up these skills to a higher level past level 1 to unlock things that are called tripods. Here, I'll just show you actually. So let's bring Flamethrower to level 1. So I have 49 skill points. At level 2, that only cost 1. Only cost 1 again. Now it started costing 2 at level 4. But once I got it to level 4, skill level 4, I am able to add one of the first passive abilities onto the skill. Let's pick Critical Chance. This vital attack just increases the crit percent on this ability by 38% on PvE. You can check out the PvP abilities by hitting Alt. It'll show you the change. It's not going to be much for this. So now at level 7, it cost me 8 to get to level 7. I now want to choose a second passive ability on this skill. So I'll choose Barrier. Barrier puts a shield on top of me when I use the ability. And then finally, once I get it to level 10, which took the rest of the points, so as you can see, it took all those points just to get this skill to level 10, I will put on Blue Flame, which allows the ability to, instead of being a red fire flame, turn to a blue flame. The duration of the skill is shortened, but the amount of ticks of damage is increased. Really good for PvP, this specific ability change. So stuff like that is kind of what you'll notice as you develop these abilities. Some of these different choices are going to be better in PvE than they will be in PvP, etc., and so on. So I'll go in there first and show you how it's built this way. Blue Flame, a lot of ticks of damage, going really quick, destroyed that mother trucker. Okay, so let me go back and change the ability up real quick. I just don't want to have this guy following me. You know what, I'm just going to blow his ass up. Let the nuke land. Let it land. Good night. Let's change that ability up a little bit for you guys. So instead of doing Blue Flame, we're going to do Scorch. The width of the fire is now going to be increased dramatically, horizontally. I'll increase the length of it too, so now it's going to be farther reaching instead of having that shield over me. And I'll keep the crit chance just because, why not? It's crit chance. So now you see that same ability with a customized tripod is different, completely different. And you can customize and change them anytime you want, just like I showed. It's either wide flame, long reaching, longer duration, holding people in their CC for longer. Totally different ability now. So after you reach a certain point in these skills and you get to level 40, you're going to stop obtaining skills every 2 levels, or 3 or 4, whatever it ends up being. And instead, you're not going to get any skills until you hit the max level, which is 50. On 50, you're going to get your Awakening skill. And I talked about it before. They might call it Ultimates in the West, or maybe they'll keep it Awakening skills. It doesn't matter. You get your first Awakening skill, which is your Ultimate. You know, you're going to be, like I said, you're going to be able to transfer that out later on for something else. But for a second one, you can just swap them in and out, and whatever one better fits your play style. But then you're also going to get one more ability as well at 50. That is just like a standard skill. And those ones are typically very good. They're used in almost every build. So that's just a note for you to keep in your mind as you're playing. I'll show you what the Awakening skill I have on this character is in a little bit when we show some examples of combat stats, but we'll talk about that in a bit. All right, so that kind of gives you a gist of how skills work in PvE, and as you can see, you can have custom different layouts. As I was discussing, you may want to change, you know, your build for raids than you do for chaos dungeons, right? So in raids, you may want to be more focused on having shields in some of your abilities or dodge abilities, and then when you get to the chaos dungeons, you might want to have a lot more mob abilities, etc. You can have these presets ready prior to going into those end game content, just to make sure you're set up the way you want to be set up. But alongside this PvE setup is PvP combat guides. That in PvP, everything is equalized. So instead of having to work to obtain these skill points that you're going to put in, you're going to have max skill points and then max combat stat points. We'll talk about combat stats in a couple minutes, but let's first just show you the layout of how PvP skills and skill builds work. So when you open up your PvP keyboard, I'm able to click it from anywhere. So I'm clicking it from right here. I have the Coliseum set up to a hotbar right here. I'm able to go to my fighter's diary. I'm not sure what they're going to call it in the West. That is just your various builds, but for PvP. So as you can see here, I have a couple different builds, just testing out different things in PvP that I might like with the blaster. I have all the available stat points to put in, and then all the available skill points to put in. So, for example, you know, I'm able to put, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 abilities to max. You can even have, I think you can have 7 abilities max as long as you have one at 4 and one at, yeah. So if I put this ability at 4 and then this one at 10 as well, I can do that, but this is just a strange build I'm testing out, so don't mind that. But moral of the story is you get max skill points. You're able to choose the abilities you want to upgrade up to their max ability, and then you also get stat points. So you get to customize a couple different builds for PvP as well, very similar to PvE, and you can choose which one you want to go in with each time you queue up for the PvP board. All right, so now let's discuss stat points. Before I get into the specific combat stat points that are on the PvP build, I just want to talk about stat points in general, just to quickly touch on them. I think you all will have a rough understanding of what these stat points mean anyway, so it's going to take me just a couple seconds here. So first you have your basic stat points, right? And then we're going to get into the combat stat points. First, basic stat points. Each class is going to have a specific thing that's just going to increase their damage. For all the gunners, for example, including the hunter, or I think they call them hunters in this, but I think in the West we're going to call them gunners, you've got your dex stat. Ultimately, all this is really doing, it just means this is how much your damage is going to be increased by. For warriors, it's going to be called strength, etc., and so on. So then some other, you know, I don't want to dive too much into these basic stats because they're like weapon damage, attack speed, critical chance, critical damage, physical defense, and then specific damage to different types. All that stuff's self-explanatory, but the main thing I wanted to talk about in terms of stat points is when we were going into the combat stats. So let's dive into what each one of these means so you have an understanding of what you'll be looking for as you create your build, but don't be afraid to experiment and kind of find out what works for you. The main way that you're going to identify and find boosts to these combat stats is through your accessories, and those accessories, for the most part, are going to be found in those big boss raids. Okay, so the first combat stat point to dive into is critical. Critical is pretty self-explanatory as well. That's just your critical chance increase. Very self-explanatory, not too crazy. The next combat stat to dive into is specialty. Specialty is a little tricky because it actually varies per class. It's a little different per class. You know, specialty, it's special per class, right? So my specialty for a gunner, and for this specific gunner is, which is the artillerist in the West, the blaster in every other country, is that my siege damage does more damage when I'm in siege form. I'll show you what that means. My firepower buffs get increased and my awakening skill gets increased, right? So my siege damage on the artillerist, it just simply means when I go into this form. When I'm in my turret form, I'm able to blast people with higher damage. My awakening skill does more damage, so I'll show you what that is too. You get 2 awakening skill options like I talked about before. This will do more damage. Okay, so the third combat stat to talk about is subdue. Subdue, I personally don't think is that useful in PvE, but I think it is very important in PvP, especially with certain class types. Subdue is exclusively doing more damage to people that are immobilized or CC'd. Impaired targets, they receive additional damage. They're either impaired or immobilized, they're on their backs, or they're stunned. Very good for certain classes because obviously there's in PvP you want to bring in a lot of those immobilization moves. So if you stack this up and you're able to pair a damage dealing move right after a CC move, you'll do even more damage. But as you can tell in PvE, it's not as important because big bosses won't be CC'd as much. Okay, so the agility combat stat is about attack speed, movement speed, and cooldown reduction. This can be very good for certain classes. Obviously, it increases things by a very minimal margin, but as you include a lot of points in here, stuff's going to really start to have an impact on your attack speed, cooldown reduction, and your movement speed. Obviously, certain classes benefit from this more. Being a blaster and not having that much movement speed, trying to gain some movement speed, it's going to just kind of equal me out. Whereas as a blaster, my playstyle is more to hold my ground and try to get people to fall into my traps rather than push people and be quick, right? So it has its pluses and minuses. Certain classes could use it over others, but it's a very cool stat. It improves 3 very important things. The next stat to talk about, which is, in my opinion, pretty self-explanatory, endurance. That's just your resistances and your defense, right? So protective effects, things along those lines. If you want to be really beefy, can be very good on a gun lancer. that might be where you want to see some endurance. But other than that, it's just beefiness. And as a mobile character, you may not need it as much, but just keep that in mind as well. So the next stat and final stat I want to talk about on combat, which I honestly believe to be the least impactful, and honestly maybe there's a build I'm missing and I haven't seen, is proficiency. And that increases the duration of abnormal status effects and reduces the amount of time normal status or abnormal status effects are on you. So I personally don't see this as useful. I mean, maybe you find a build where it's a lot of burn damage on the blaster or something along those lines, and it does end up being impactful. But in my personal opinion, it's not as useful across the board. And I'm sure, I'm sure there's certain raids where this, increasing your proficiency like crazy may have a benefit, but in the long run, you're not going to want to just stack an unbelievable amount of proficiency. But that's just my personal opinion. Maybe I'm missing something. If you have some information that I might not know about or a certain build, please throw that in the comments below. But that's the gist of what proficiency is. All right, everybody. So that's going to do it for today's video. I wanted to keep it dialed into the specific topic we're going to talk about so you get the information you need and not much else. Thank you so much for showing up. All the comments, the support, the subs, the follows on all my socials means the world to me. If you like my stuff, please consider doing some of that. But thank you so much for being here today. I love you guys.